Where do you come from? Where are you at? And where are you going? I believe that those three things are vital on the journey to find out really the authentic self, the authentic leader. You have an opportunity to live fully alive. And I think most people don't ever get there. In your greatest places of pain, you find your greatest sense of purpose. Hey, what's up, guys? I want to welcome you back to episode 25 of the New Rules podcast. It is your boy, Adrian, here. And I am joined by the one, the only. She's rocking the hat today.
I am. We got next.
Breezy Clark. Breezy, what's happening?
Not much, We have some pretty big proposals, presentations.
Yes.
So that has been my world for the past 2 weeks.
It definitely has been. We have been on the grind. So, hey, that is part of it all. But if you are here and you are new to the New Rules community, we are glad that you've decided to pull up with us. And, man, here at the New Rules podcast and really in our New Rules community, we exist to help people write new rules or space and place they find themselves. We really believe in helping develop authentic leaders. We believe that is the future. It's people who are self-aware, have the resilience to remain self-aware. So that's what this pod's about. We dive into to topics that really go around this idea of authentic leadership. And so make sure you leave a comment. Make sure you leave a review for us. Share if you see our stuff pop up on your TikTok or you pop up on Instagram or wherever you find it. Again, we love what we've been seeing. And so we're super thankful that you're a part and that you're actually listening to the podcast. And so, Bri, what we got today?
Okay, do we want to go more culture or do we want to go more aired out?
Well, I think let's go more aired out today. Let's go more aired out.
I think you're going to understand this.
Okay.
Okay. So, those people, I say those people, I feel like this is something we all can do. Definitely something that I could do at times. Mm-hmm. When you're telling a story, and let's say I were to say something like, oh, like my dad called me to tell me he loved me or something like that.
Yep.
And there's that person who didn't have a good relationship with their dad. Wait, before you laugh. There's that person who didn't have their good relationship and they're like, I wish.
Yeah.
Or like, imagine that. And like, I do that too.
Yes.
But it is actually very frustrating.
Okay, so tell me why.
And again, I'm going to say this again. I definitely do this.
Yep.
But in our world where, the emotional intuitive conversations have become more frequent.
Yep.
Rightfully so. There is we shouldn't undermine people or make people feel bad for having a healthy relationship. Yeah. And I feel like we do that. We make people feel guilty for having relationships that are healthy, or maybe they did have like a parent that was present or a sibling or whatever that might be. I mean, we can do that with money too. Like someone says like, oh, I got these like new shoes. And you're like, imagine like being able to do it. Right. Yeah, it's okay, well,
no. Okay,
now I don't want to talk to you about that anymore. Like, that's cool.
Now, why do you think that is? Why do you think people why is that why do you think that's just our response?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it speaks to just like a frustration to what you've experienced, like a frustration that leads to a little bit more envy, a little bit more jealousy. That is actually more rooted in sadness.
Yep. And I think, and I would agree with. I also think it's sometimes just like a coping mechanism. I think so many times people just have like done it as a response, and now I think most of the times people don't even really think about it.
Right.
They just say it. You're just kind of like, oh yeah, it must be nice. So, I was trying to get like you or whatever. You're just like, and then I think sometimes people really just don't even think about it. So, but that's actually interesting. But that really bothers you, huh?
No, it's not something that I notice every time or that just like really grinds my gears. But I was thinking about it. I don't know. I was like laying in bed at night and I was just randomly thinking about it. And I was like, but I was more so thinking about it. There wasn't a specific situation that happened to me as much as I was thinking like, dang, I can do that. Like I do that even in my head.
Okay.
Like I might not have like a reaction out loud. Sometimes I do, but I definitely do that in my head. And I was thinking like, what does that do for me?
Yeah.
Like ultimately, what does that kind of response do for me? So it was more one of those, why am I like reacting that way?
Yeah.
What does that do for me? And what does that do to the other person?
I'll give you one of mine since we're kind of on this thing. So one of mine that just bothers me is in some of the work that we do, and it's like, and again, this happens almost every place that we have been around, and not even just in the places we actually work in groups we work with. I mean, I just hear it all the time. Of people like, if I have friends who work at a company and they're always talking about their past company.
Oh my gosh.
Dude, I'm like, dude, and they're always like, yeah, well, when I was here, when I was there, well, this is what we did here. And I'm like, well, why are you still not there? Yeah, like, why are you still not there?
Where do you work now?
That's what I'm saying. And then my thinking is like, if it was so great, then why either you're buns and they got rid of you, or it wasn't as great as you thought? But it's always like, hey, yeah, when I was here. And I think what it is, it's like, it's a trump card for making you feel like you know more.
Right.
Because a lot of times what people do, they thought especially if they worked at a large company, and they'll throw out that large company name. But when you really dig into it, they didn't like a lot of stuff about that culture, but it makes them feel like they have that leg up. Oh, yeah, when I was here, when I was at P&G, or, what I'm saying, when I was at Eli Lilly, or whatever. I'm using some of these. We have not worked with P&G or Eli Lilly. But there are still like these big companies out there. This is what we did. Or when I was at Amazon.
Right. Okay, wait, hold on. Some of them are my favorite because I'm like, well, I don't know if I want to be doing what they do over there. Like, because we do culture stuff.
Yes.
And we're like, have you read it? Did you work there? Are you telling me that's what you want to replicate? Because why are you here? If you want to replicate it, why are you working here right now?
And that's my thing. It drives me nuts. And what it is people's insecurity to make them want to like have a leg up, or I know more than what you do, or they're trying to like relate or whatever. I'm like, no. If that's the case, then go back and work there. If it was so great, then go back and work there. But it's like, I hear that a lot. And I don't know. Every time I hear it, just like, it's becoming more and more. It just pisses me off. I literally want to tell you, like, shut up. Like, I don't care. Like, I don't care where you used to work at. We are here. Or you're working at that company now. So make that company great and create that culture to where when you leave, because here's what's going to happen. You're going to be the same person that company you're at blows up and does a good job, that you're going to be now repping that company. Oh, when I was such and such, man, this is what we did there. I'm like, just stop, man. Like, you don't, and I think it's because, no, you don't have to feel like you have to have a leg up on people, or feel like you're just an expert, or man, I just know what I'm doing because I was at this company. I'm like, did you put the policy in place? Were you in there crafting the culture? No, you were a byproduct. I mean, you were like you were probably 25th man down the line. So you just were a part of the culture. You didn't set the culture. You didn't activate the culture. You didn't set up the groups. You just showed up and you're like, oh, this is what we did. Like you did it. I'm like, stop, man. Like you're just. Everybody wants to be more than just. Everybody wants to be more than regular, man. Like you're just regular. It's okay. Like it's all right.
I think that I can share this. My brother works at Microsoft, and one time he told me how how you can have a little bit of like a bio or whatever in your thing. So, like people actually have like former blank employee. I won't say the names of like the majority that they have. And he's like, it's one of the most frustrating things is like it's like, what are you talking about? Like we all work for the same company right now. When I pull you up to send you a chat, I don't need to see that you used to work for Amazon. Like I don't care.
Dude, that's what and it's one of those things where I feel like I don't know what I'm trying to feel like a street level. Like what's the what's like? I mean, is that the street level? Like kind of like teardrop tattoo? Like what I'm saying? Is that like is that corporate America? Is that the corporate America? Is that corporate America? Teardrop tattoo? Like
absolutely.
What I'm saying? Like I worked here. That's what it is. So that's what we're gonna do.
Stop.
We're gonna start.
And it's like sometimes it's like you should be ashamed of that.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. Like listen, people realize teardrop tattoos normally mean that you either it's if I'm not mistaken, it's either you killed somebody or it's a fallen soldier. You shouldn't be happy about any of that. So some of these companies you rep, I'm like, no, they suck. And so you keep saying it. Yeah, that's what I'm doing. I'm about to create my own line of tees. Grady, I got to get you to design own line of tees, Grady, our producer out there. We're gonna get just a picture of somebody in corporate America, just like with like a P&G logo coming down there.
Stop. Stop. No, we need to make a LinkedIn post, and that needs to be like the graphic for the LinkedIn article. You know, how people always have those like,
yes,
pardon me, cheesy graphics for LinkedIn blogs.
Yeah, please stop. Like, please stop telling me.
It'll be AI.
Please stop telling me where you used to work at.
Wait, that would go big. We need to write that down.
We need to go ahead and get that. We need to go ahead and get that article. Get that Chat GPT write it for us. Man.
Oh my god!
Put that thing out tomorrow. Listen, we just came up with a creative idea. Here we go.
Okay, well.
With that being said, let's jump into the pod. Well, all right. Well, today we're going to start something new that we're going to be doing. This idea of I got a story to tell. And kind of what this comes about is just really, as we talk a lot about the authentic self and really being an authentic leader, you got to really do a lot of work to figure that out. A lot of times that word, being my authentic self, it's been said like it's a very easy thing where, man, just being my authentic self, it's easy. You know, it's kind of like whatever I'm sensing, feeling, and it's just, I can just, if I naturally feel it, then that's just me. But what we do, and really what you'll start to realize when you're really trying to dig to find the authentic self, the authentic leader, it is a lot of work. Mm-hmm. If whatever you find is found really fast and easy, then let me just go ahead and give you a fair warning. It's probably not authentically you. That is a lot of work to actually do it. But to do that, you actually have to go back. You know, and this idea of I got a story to tell, you got to go back and do you actually really know your story? Do you know? Because I believe that most of us have been shaped. Our lives have given us very clear clues of many times of who we are. And my famous, the famous quote I love is, the idea from Parker J. Palmer is don't tell your life what you plan to do with it, but ask your life what it plans to do with you. Because it's already, and what he's saying is that it's already in his book, Let Your Life Speak. He's saying your life has already been telling you what to do. So a lot of times you got to know your story. So we're going to kind of go back and how do we actually begin to go on this discovery process of finding the authentic self?
Whenever we work with clients, we have a grid that we take them through, especially when we're working with individuals. Yep. Can you explain that grid and a little bit more about the one that we're going to be focusing on today?
Yeah. Really, it's three things. It's the idea of like, where do you come from, where are you at, and where are you going? I believe that those three things are vital on the journey of really where you're actually to find out really the authentic self, the authentic leader. Because you have to know where you're coming from because as I mentioned earlier, and we'll dive more into this, is that a lot of your life coming up is just constantly speaking to you. The idea of where you're at. Many times is that, man, the state of like your current life, the state of where you're currently at mentally, physically, emotionally, and then also the future. Like, where are you actually going? What's the point? Like, where are you actually headed? I think many times all those things speak to really helping an individual kind of collectively put it all together. But I believe that you can't start with where you're going before you start with actually where did you come from.
In the introduction, you mentioned that a lot of this generation and within this cultural moment, we focus on the authentic self and defining it as really the first layer. Mm-hmm. Whatever comes easy is just kind of who we are. Whatever is comfortable is essentially who we are. Yep. Why do you think it is that we default to that?
Because I think that's one of the things that we just have been like taught and told. I think over the last 30 years, it's been whatever. It's been about feel. It's been whatever I feel, then that's what I am. Though I think feelings are important. And feelings are actually, they can be breadcrumbs towards and passions and things like that toward like purpose, calling, authenticity. I don't think it's the only thing. And I think what we do is we've been taught that. So it's if I just feel this way, then that's it. And then I start forming whatever views I have from there because it's just my natural feeling. But those feelings are always shifting and feelings are always changing. And many times feelings aren't always accurate because there's so much that goes into that. There's your story of where you come from. There's the pain sometimes that we're actually hiding from. And so if I present this way, that covers up something that I'm hiding from or something I'm trying to cover from my actual past. Or, man, sometimes pain can create your own, if it's the idea where you're like, man, we were bullied growing up. Now all of a sudden you become the guy who's like, I'm going to present always as tough. like that was a little bit with me, is that because I was like, a thin kid, frail kid, and I grew up in a tough city, and early on I was bullied and things like that, that as I got older, it was like, no, especially when I got to a place where I could physically, I was whatever, I would present myself tougher probably than what I was. I know it was tougher than what I was because why? Because in the end, I was covering up from something that I was actually really hiding from my childhood. So I think that there's so many reasons why we do that, and it becomes very shallow. It's not, and again, to the stuff we're going to dive in today, it's just, you'll start to realize it's just a lot of work. And it's really painful to really start going down through that process. So it's it's the least path of resistance. And that's what humans, we naturally want least path of resistance in almost anything that we do.
Sometimes this work can be challenging, yep. to say the least, specifically because to tell somebody who's not self-aware that they're not self-aware
yeah.
just does not work right, because they're not aware enough to realize that they're not self-aware.
Yeah.
And that's like the hardest step, is
yeah.
getting somebody to the point of acceptance. Mm-hmm. And if you had to point out symptoms per se of what it looks like to be unaware, so that someone might be able to say, oh, I'm hearing that, and that's definitely me,
yeah.
or even symptoms of purposelessness, because I think this ties into feeling a lack of a sense of purpose in life.
Yeah.
Could you point those out?
Yeah, I think when I'm listening to someone like kind of talk, I just let them, a lot of times I just let them talk. And if I hear something consistently said, like, I'm this, I'm this, I'm this, I'm this, and they keep saying they're this, what I always tell people, if you're constantly telling someone what you are, then you're probably not that. That's one of the first red flags for me. If you're constantly telling someone that, you have to tell somebody that's pretty that they're pretty. Like the whole world knows you're pretty. Like, but if you're constantly, no, I'm this, or like, oh, I'm funny. Okay, well then people are they're gonna laugh. At
That's
some
the
point.
Worst one.
Like, I'm saying, I'm so funny. You're like, really? Like, yeah, or man, that's man, I'm so self-aware. I'm so self-aware, and then you're just like, really? I think that. So I think that's the first thing. Is just constantly mention. I think that for people, what I start to try to do is get them to. I just start to evaluate their life. That's why it kind of goes into this whole thing of like the story of them kind of going in their past and kind of telling their story, because what you start to do is put together threads. You start to hear things. I ask questions, or as they start to write their story out, they start, when I did this, what are some of their fondest memories, and why are these memories like, so fun to them? Like I try to tell, like when I was a kid, I used to love, my parents, one thing would be on Christmas, they would kind of design like our whole living room as if like Santa Claus showed up, right? So our toys would be all laid out in all these different ways. And I used to love that because my imagination was like a big part. And so for me, I just had all these thoughts. Oh man, Santa Claus came down this way, da da da. A lot of my, growing up with the toys I had, I played video games. This was the first line of when video games started. But man, like I used to love like G.I. Joes and Star Wars figures, wrestling figures, because I could literally create these scenarios with them. So I tell those memories, and when I started realizing, like, oh yeah, my imagination has always been a thing for me. And so I let people talk, like, what's some of your fondest memories? What's some, where do you find yourself? We'll talk, about sovereign themes, whatever. So a lot of times what I try to do is I let people just talk, and the things that they're telling me, how they present themselves versus a lot of the stories I'm hearing, and then and I can kind of put together. Then I start saying, man, what's the like result of where are they at now? Like where are they at? Do they, they're saying, oh man, I'm just a great salesperson, but they've never been successful at sales. They always will say, oh yeah, man, I'm a great seller. Here's another big one. I'm an entrepreneur. And I'm like, they've never started or sustained or built anything that's lasted. Then I would say you're not an entrepreneur probably, because entrepreneurs start things, they create things, and those things sometimes, I say all of them make it, but they're constantly creating things that get off the ground, at least have a fighting chance. And so I just started to always evaluate what fruit are they actually producing as well.
A lot of the time we will see that people, will think that they're self-aware, but what they're actually doing is attaching themselves to their skill sets.
Very good point, yeah.
And especially in the American context, that's usually related to vocation, but like specifically a job title and role. Why do you think that is, and what do you think the difference is between, I have this skill set versus this is who I am?
Yeah, I think that a skill set can be attached to like a calling, but I don't think skill sets are not callings. And so what we can do is say, oh yeah, I am like I said, I'm a good salesperson. I'm a good communicator. Man, I'm good at strategy. And so what we'll say is that, so then whatever, because ultimately that's how it's been built over our whole like school system to the working world has been that. It's what you go to school to then go to college to do what? To find your career. To find, that's what vocation, the idea of vocation. But the actual word, the original word means, again, it means to speak. And the original, I think it's in Latin. It means, I think it's vocado, if I'm not mistaken. It's to speak. And the idea is that was the old Quaker saying, is that like vocation is for your life to speak. What it's morphed now into is that because of how our world has been set up, our job has become us. And that was never the case. It was the idea that like jobs change all the time, but I think calling and purpose don't. And so I think we've been trained. I think that's the biggest thing. Kind of the short of it. Our whole system is training you to go find a job, and then we say that job is our calling or our purpose. And where most people get screwed up is because no one wakes up and says, I think my purpose in life is, man, hey, I want to work at, I'm working in for them, it may be like to work at a fast food restaurant, or, no one was like, some people say, man, I want to wake up and again, though, I want to be, my calling is to be a garbage man or something like that. And the thing, those are all great. Those are all good jobs. The point is like what messes people up, because then people get disappointed and they're wondering, I'm failing in life, because they think that they're looking for whatever job that's a calling versus saying, no. Whether if you're working at McDonald's, you're working as a garbage man, if you're working in a C-suite, your calling, your purpose can come out in any of those places. And so I think that's why people are constantly getting those places, and they get really get disappointed, because that job is not what we're ultimately, but we've been trained to go chase a job that way.
Are we born with self-awareness?
Are we born? I think some people are born with it more than others. And I think that goes back to kind of the thing of where we're at today. I'm talking about, where do we come from? Because I think there's so much that comes along with that. I believe that people can be, because of their upbringing and maybe the trauma and pain that they experience, that can be suffocated completely out of them, because the pain of what they're going through, they have to disconnect in order to survive. It's too painful, and they don't have the tools to navigate through that. If you're someone who is growing up in a home where it's a very volatile home, and mom and dad are just, maybe mom is there and mom's working multiple jobs, and then she may have people in and out of the house, and then you got other family members around, and it's just always chaotic. And then all of a sudden now there's fear, because you may have an alcoholic uncle that live with you, and that alcoholic uncle, when he comes home, he just walks in the door, and because he's an angry drunk. And so all of a sudden now and you're the oldest. And so he's going to take it out on you. And so because of that can be something where, man, that reality you're living in shuts you down. Because if you actually had to really process that and don't have the tools, you're like, it just speaks to such the depth, so people disconnect. So I think a lot of times our upbringings and our stories can really disconnect us. And I think that's where a lot of people at times can live. I think some people have it at a heightened level, and sometimes they're not made aware that they actually even have it. They don't even know what self-awareness actually looks like. Now, I will say this. I think it's like, as kids, many times I think you start off with the purest form of it, and some are higher than others, but I think life just pushes against us to suffocate self-awareness out of us. I mean, most of life is pushing against you to not be aware. It's pushing against you to perform. You know, you think about it, man. When you grow up, I mean, let me ask you this question. Can you recall, I know that because it's a lot different for, you know, because again, just kind of your story, but like, what was something that like you just, when you were a child, that you actually had fun doing?
I had fun. Like I loved creating worlds, and it like kind of, I can tell too, like what it ties to now, like with more of like creating things of beauty. But I used to like take cardboard boxes and like draw like designs and like houses. I used to have like books where I would make like dresses all of the time. So anything that was a little bit more imaginative, where it was like I can imagine this thing in my head and I can do everything I can to try to bring it to life right now, to whatever I can, even though it looks nothing like how it is in my head. Yeah. But I can still paint it how I want it to be, essentially.
What does that tie to?
I mean, there's the good and the bad.
Okay. All right.
I can do both.
Give me both.
I can start with the bad. I like from such a young age, I had to escape reality, like similar to what you're talking about. It's like I had to disconnect. I had to create a world that was a lot less painful. And so because of that, my imagination and like my level of fantasy was like a skill that I crafted, because it's what I did every single day. Intuitively. And then the more beautiful side of it is like now I can see things that are like cracked, broken, bland, and boring, and imagine what they could be. Like I could be, you know, in this room that's empty, and I could you know, paint things on the wall in my head. Gotcha. And I think that shows up even in relationships, because like I have been told, it's hard for me to believe at times, like I can sit with people and they feel like very comfortable, like sharing things that are super dark, that are going on, because they don't feel like it impacts me or like scares me. It's like I could just kind of sit there, and then they usually walk away feeling some level of, but it's not going to be this way forever. Like somehow it's going to continue moving forward into something that's a lot more restored.
Yeah, and I think that's and just as everyone's listening to this, like being able to hear that's a prime example to where, and I know working with you for the last few years, is that when you first started, your self-awareness, listening to what you were saying, your self-awareness was incredibly low, but as a child, your self-awareness probably was high. But as you can see, just life literally pushed against that. And so the point is, I think so many people like just don't understand how life pushes against them to not be aware. It pushes us to live in a fantasy. It pushes us to live disconnected. It pushes us to perform versus being there, because we're taught we got to be responsible. Man, go pay your bills. You know, you can't get a job. Like, you know, hey, Bri, man, I like, you know, you're painting and you're doing stuff in the cardboard box, but that's not going to pay your light bill one day. And so what that speaks to us is like, well, I don't want to be like in the dark, so let me stop this, right? Or, you know, hey, you got to start, you got to grow up. You got to start getting serious now. And we lose those things. And so I think that drowns out self-awareness. It drowns out the wonder. And as we move forward in life, next thing you know, people are way more disconnected. That's the thing I want to say. Most human beings are so unaware. Like that is one of the top things that I would say is an epidemic, especially in the West. Here in the United States, I can't speak for the rest of the world, I speak for the United States, is most people are just unaware. It's an epidemic of how unaware people actually are today. And I think it's leading to a lot of the stuff we're experiencing.
We say consistently over and over and over again that the process of becoming self-aware is costly and it is painful. We, like Dr. Zoda says, it's a beautiful and a terrible gift at the same time. Why would somebody want to do that?
Because I believe that you have an opportunity to live fully alive. And I think most people don't ever get there. It's like the work of getting in shape. It's like once you're there, you know, it's like, man, like, you know, but it's, you're like, oh my God, like it's, you feel better, you sleep better, your body feels better. But prior to getting there, you're like, dude, this is horrible. Is this even worth it? Right? I think it's just worth the life. And that's life. We're not talking about just even like your physical body. I mean, again, we're all going to get older. You all, like, your body deteriorates, whatever. But we're actually talking about like who you actually are as a person, like living life and never finding contentment, never finding, man, a sense of like calling and purpose. I think that's a very difficult way to live. And I think we've just settled for that. And so that's why I think it's important. You have one life. So why not try to live that life as aware as possible of who you've been actually designed to be? And so that's why you should go. And that's why you should dig through your story. That is why you have to go back to where did you come from? Because as you dig there, and we say it all the time here, in your greatest places of pain, you find your greatest sense of purpose. Again, I like to repeat things over and over again, whether it's on podcasts or I'm talking, because it takes that much time. You got to hear something over and over again for it to stick. But I want you to hear that in your greatest places of pain, many times you find your greatest sense of purpose. So I can't tell you how many people, and again, it's one of the biggest questions people ask: what happens when I die, and why am I here? But to find out why you're here, you many times have to go through and dig through the story. You got to dig through some of those high moments and some of those pain moments in order to figure out what are those breadcrumbs leading to. Where's that purpose at? Because remember, life is pushing against us to be unaware, and especially in our worlds that we're living in now, where we can actually have access to be disconnected more and more. And it's not going to get any easier. The more technology continues to increase, so AI increases, virtual reality increases, access to again to be in certain worlds, and again, whoever knows what's going to happen with VR or augmented reality. But the more and more we're going to be able to be more disconnected from self. And so everybody thinks that's great. I'm like, dude, that's one of the dangers that's coming. We're not, I mean, can you imagine how much more we're going to be unaware when we have technology to just take us out of here? Before, Bri, you were still connected to the world, but you had to use your imagination. Now, you don't have to even use your creativity. It's like, oh, here's a machine that can eventually take me somewhere. And so I think that's why the work is so important, because, again, in the end, man, why not live a life full of that? And here's the thing, living a life to the full, because then eventually you have children, and like it impacts them. And don't think it's just going to stop and then it's going to impact their kids. But that's one thing. If you're just the one who says, you know what, no, I want my kids to see me fully alive, living on calling, living on purpose. That's the one thing Wendy and I talk a ton about, is that we wanted our kids to be able to front row to see that, to see us actually living on calling and purpose, the imperfections of it, the hardship of it, the pain of it, the good parts about it, but every day being able to wake up and say, man, why am I doing this? Why do you guys do this? It's because this is what we've actually been called to do. I tell my kids that a lot. I'm like, this is what I've been called to do, so I have no option. I have no option about how I feel. I have no option of, there's times where I have to get on stage and communicate and speak. And in those times, there's a lot of times where before I step on that stage, I am massively sad and depressed. But I say, but this is what I've been called to do, so I do it. And you know what's happening? When I get up there, it's wild, because when I take those steps sometimes, it's like, I tell people, it's the idea that when you take those steps, even in that pain, it's kind of like God meets you there. And when he meets you there in those moments, it's a wonderful thing where you actually, the thing that you didn't have off stage, you have it on stage. It's not because it's not because I'm on a stage. It's actually it's one of the things I'm supposed to do. I see it when I'm in an individual conversation and no one's around and I'm helping unlock purpose in somebody. To me, I can be sad, depressed, and somebody walks in or somebody I'm supposed to meet with, and I do that, and I come alive. And there's nobody around but us. So it's not about being on stage, but it's actually about the calling and the purpose it brings to life. And I want my kids to be able to see that. I want to be able to say, you can live life that way.
When you were 30-something,
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember the exact age,
Yep.
It was the first time you walked into a therapist's office
Yep.
to see Dr. Zoto. We've talked about this, a ton of times
Yep.
on the podcast before. What made you take the step towards wanting to do more of the emotional work? And then can you explain more on why you decided to keep on going?
Yeah, it was because honestly what sparked it wasn't to let me go back and look at my story to find purpose and calling. It was that I was the church that I lead, Engage, we were starting it. And so I went to a church planner assessment. One of the things they said in the assessment that there's 18 building blocks of successful church planner. All they have green light, yellow light, red light, and all the different building blocks. And so I got greens on 16 of the 18. The other 2 I got yellow light. It was just about mental emotional health. And they're saying, hey, only reason why we didn't give you green because we really believe you need that because of how hard this work is, how hard it is to plant. I mean, it's like starting a business. I mean, again, it's even harder than starting a business, doing both. So you need to get somebody who can actually help you, a therapist. And so I a long story, but I got to connect to Dr. Zoda. So I went in just having someone because they said I should have this. So I'm like, okay, I'll go in there. And when I went in there, I started realizing as he started talking to me about, just EQ and, hey, I'm just hearing this about, he just started just saying, you got a gift. And I'm like, well, what are you talking? And so just starting to unpack that, I was like, oh. And so I was like, okay, I need to keep meeting with somebody. At least I got somebody I can go talk to, vent everything to. That's what I kind of thought it was going to be. But as I kept working through it, I started realizing, man, there's so much more of my story and so much more of what shaped me that I didn't realize. So, I knew there was moments in my life that shaped me. I didn't realize how much life had suffocated me. And so once I started realizing that, though it was painful, it's kind of like working out where it's like, this is awful. But when you would get done, you're like, oh, but it's like that workout where you're like, this is horrible. I'm going to vomit through the whole thing. And then you finish like, oh, I'm so glad I did that. That's pretty much what it's like emotionally. But here's the thing about it, I tell people about the emotional side. It's just the emotional work is like literally twice as hard and twice as long as physical body work. So it was just like, every time I go in there, I'm like, all right, here we go. And it's just, but I started seeing the results of it. But I also saw where it got way worse before it got better. That's the other thing. All of a sudden, you're going in there. It wasn't like I went in there like, oh, man, hey, I'm going to talk about this. It was like, I got comfortable with my monsters in the closet. Now, all of a sudden, I opened the door, and them things start running around. I'm like, whoa, whoa, whoa. We kind of had a truce. Mm-hmm. But I'm so glad I did because eventually the monsters come out the closet. They don't stay in there. It's just I was able to open the door myself. I tell people either you open the door yourself or they're going to open the door. And it's way better for it to be on your terms.
There's a quote that I sent to you a while back. I'm going to read it because it kind of goes into some of the next question, which is, unless we do conscious work in it, the shadow is almost always projected. That is, it is neatly laid on someone or something else, so we do not have to take responsibility for it. And I think it ties really well into what it is that you're saying, where it's like if you don't take hold of this on your own terms at some point in your life, it's going to happen. And most of the time, it's at a point where people will not take responsibility for it. Most of the time. It's usually like, let's take marriage, for example. It's usually like, that person failed me.
Yes.
That person did all of these things. Or, your kids don't do what they're supposed to do. And it's like, well, like, my kids are the problem. Or I wasn't good enough, which is just another way of, in some ways, like, forfeiting the responsibility of the work. I think the opposite of self-awareness in some ways is self-deception. And I think that we all live in kind of this fog of just the lies that we believe, whether they're, things that we come up with or things that other people have told us. How dangerous is that? Because like we talk about it all the time and we can kind of fluidly, go through our conversation. But like this is serious.
Yeah, it's very serious because if you are not self-aware, we're not, a lot of times we're talking from the angle of, unearthing who you actually are, becoming aware of who you are, of maybe purpose, but then also skill sets, abilities, the way you relate, whatever, interact. But the other danger part of it, which I think is, and I love that you brought this up, is when you're not self-aware, you don't have any idea of how your shadow casts on people. And you don't think you're ever the problem. And again, a lot of the shadows that have been formed in our, like the dark sides of us, we all can point to real pain, real events that have insinuated that. But like, I want to be really clear. So what? Like, and I say that with compassion, but so what? Because if you aren't aware of that, it hurts people. Even though you were hurt, you hurt people. And you need to become aware because your shadow side is hurting people. Your overbearing nature is hurting people. You just say, I'm just being, I'm someone who's, just being conscious and cautious, and I do that with my friends and my children and my other relationships. It's like, no, you're like, you didn't have control. So now, this is one way it plays out. Now you're just having, like, now you're a micromanager and controlling everything because you didn't have your life, for whatever reason, there was part of your life that times was spinning out of control. So now you do whatever you can to have control, and your shadow side is suffocating somebody. So what's crazy is you didn't have control. You got suffocated. Now you trying to get control. You're suffocating people the same way the other person who you said you never wanted to be like you're doing. We become just like that when we're not aware. And our shadow side cast on people. For example, for me, I am like a go, go, go. Listen, I have a high capacity. We can like create. I get momentum. I like to handle. And here's the thing: it left to myself, and just left to like, yo, this is just me. And you know what? I lead, so people need to keep up. What will be left behind me is this: body bags of people who don't think I care, and they will say it's moral. They will say, oh, he did that, and he is morally wrong for what he did. He did this. He caused me to do this. My issues happen in my family because he did. And then what I could do is like, well, that has nothing to do with me. You should take personal responsibility for yourself. Well, I have to know how my gift plays out on the dark side. I have to know that sometimes I'm going to run faster. And so what do I have to do? I have to put people around me, like yourself and others, who are there to say, hey, we got to slow down. And then I know that, and I have to remind myself, okay. And I was like, I've made a commitment. I'm going to listen to that, because that's how my shadow side can play out. My shadow side played out with my depression with my wife. Like living under, it took me forever to understand how that impacted her. The fear of like, oh my gosh, at some point in time, I could just get the phone call that he's gone. And living underneath that shadow, dude, and again, real stuff going on in me. But that side impacted her. And it took me forever to realize how that was impacting her. And so that's not okay. And I think so many times we just think about self-awareness, about what we can get and how we're going to find our calling and purpose. Some of you need to figure out your self-awareness, because you're freaking killing people. Mm-hmm. Like, people don't want to be around you. You're harming people, and you're leading people. And you just justify it like, this is just how I am. No. Nope. Can't do that. There are parts of, yes, that's who you are. But then you know what? Then you need to be aware to put the right things around you to protect others. And also, there are certain times that who you are, everybody doesn't need to see that side. You know, there's parts that, Bri, that you get to see of me because how close you are, that others who work for us and work for me do not get to see. Why? Because they can't handle that part. There's parts that Wendy gets to see that no one else can see. Why? Because no one else can handle that part. And so I think that's it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes complete sense. I'm glad you brought that up because one of the things that I appreciate the most about you is that you can sit in the midst of duplicity and deceit, and you can call a spade a spade. Mm-hmm. And I think that you've worked over time to have the confidence to do that, because that makes you feel insane most of the time. It makes you feel insane, and it makes you feel lonely. Yep. And also, that's what it feels like to deal with yourself.
Yep.
Like to sit in all the ways that you're lying to yourself or accepted lies that other people have put on you and start calling a spade a spade. Yep. And you can't do that work alone, but you also have to carry the weight of the insanity of the internal dialogue, the chaos, and the loneliness that entails. And my biggest problem, which you already mentioned, is that when we see leaders, and this is a podcast for leaders, who are in positions of power where they have a lot of access, a lot of money, and they're managing a lot of people, and they lose that ability to call a spade within themselves and then also externally. And I think a lot of the times we can place the blame onto like the narcissistic leader, which is true. But a codependent leader lacks that ability too, because they're so worried about what other people think about them. And we have seen people who are codependent, who are like afraid of what people think about them. Genuinely, that is not considered a narcissist. And after years of sitting in that place with a lot of access, they end up taking people down and like genuinely believe that that's the right thing to do.
Yeah. And it's because of this. It's the root is the same thing. A codependent person and a narcissist have the same. And again, and I already know, I'm going to say this, Grady's going to clip this. And it's going to be, and when Grady clips this, there's going to be some people, TikTok, IG, who are going to jump in the comment section, and they're going to be like, there's no way. And yes, so let me just go ahead and just prepare you for this. It's the same root. Self-codependency and narcissism, it's the same root. It's self-worship. One just looks better. The narcissist, like they just know. I mean, a lot of times narcissists, like they got to know at levels like they are narcissists. And codependent people think they're better. Oh, it's because I care about you. No. You care what other people think about you, which means, no, I care about what you think about me. It's about me. Narcissists just say, yeah, it's about me. They just say it's about them. You're just stupid and don't. And I say stupid. Hear me when I'm not saying mentally. I'm like, you're just deceived. You're literally deceived that you don't think that you're actually like that. It's not about you. And so that's where people end up doing that, to where we see people who live in these codependent ways and they think that, everyone's taking advantage, or, man, no, this just, I'm being more calm and patient. And I know I don't say these things because people got to figure it out. And you're like, no, you just don't want to say anything because how you're going to be viewed and how you're going to be seen to the world. Because you want people to see you a certain way, just like the narcissist wants to be seen in a certain way. It's the same root. And I think that that's where codependent leaders and narcissistic leaders are, and I think are in the same boat. And I think that we have a lot more. Let me tell you this. We have because here's the problem. Codependent leaders are way more an issue than narcissistic leaders, because there's way more codependent leaders in the world. There's way more codependent leaders than there are narcissists.
Agreed. I will add to that too. I know that we're talking intensely, we're talking kind of stern, but I think it's because sometimes people just need a shake. Like this is something that you should be afraid. You should have a healthy fear of and be that it moves you to action, to ask yourself, wait, is it possible that I'm doing this? And if so, what could that look like? And that's just the first place that you need to start. But that's most definitely the starting point. And
let me say this. Here's the tension that you have to manage. Because I want to be very clear. Why I say it very sternly is not because I am perfect. Like, the thing I have to sit with is I talk a ton about authenticity, self-awareness, resilience, remain self-aware. And I have to, you mentioned this earlier, and I have to sit with places in my life where I'm not fully authentic yet. I have to sit with that. Because you don't get fully authentic. Like, all of a sudden I wake up, you know what? I'm fully authentic. Here we go. You know what I'm saying? I took the pill. I went to therapy for 3 weeks, and now I'm fully authentic. No, it's for the rest of your life. You're going to uncover things. Sometimes you're going to, like, something you don't even know you're not aware of. Like, oh, and then 10 years ago, I thought I think I'm a pretty aware person. Now I'm like, dude, I was nowhere near that, right? I'm going to look 10 years from now, God willing, and be like, oh, my gosh, I thought I was at the height of my self-awareness, and I probably won't be. And I know there's things right now that I'm personally working through to become more and more authentic, that there's parts of my story that want me to be seen a certain way by people. I know that. So it's hard because sometimes I'm realizing I'm not fully where I need to be. So how can I say this towards someone else? Well, because I could say this because I actually think authentic people, when you know you're not authentic in other ways, you know what I mean? When you know, like, I'm still in process, just like everybody else is still in process. Doesn't mean you shouldn't speak something. Just like and again, may not be a good example, but like a doctor who's been working on something, like a doctor's going to be better, like in year 10 or 15 than they are in year 5. That doesn't mean should they not help people? No, they're going to like go in there, let me help. And I guarantee they look back in year 15 and be like, man, the fact that people let me operate on them, that's crazy. You know what I'm saying? Like,
well, okay, but also the doctor knows better than me, the patient. It's like when you're many years beyond where I'm at, even not from a time standpoint, but it's like if you're just even one step more emotionally developed than me, you can help me.
That's it. And I also think when you have and I think also, I want to not belittle this, I know something I can do this, but also it's a skill set too. Like, I actually think that helping people like unlock authenticity is calling. So I think I have sometimes a skill set that's just not like, oh yeah, I'm a person who becomes self-aware. Like, no. I have a skill set that's beyond what most people have. And so I want to help people do that. But I'm also still in process of becoming more and more this way. And so I think, but it is what you're saying, it's a very serious thing because, man, like, I mean, right now, I'm going through something called somatic therapy. I'm trying different stuff. I know, right? That'll be for another podcast for another day for what I've been doing. And like, as my daughter been saying, my daughter's like, man, my middle child one day, she's like, you really are doing white people stuff nowadays. But I've got somebody really helping me right now. And matter of fact, is we're like this day, it was one of the sessions we did, and there was a body movement, all this, but also we dig into like some more different types of therapy, and it was a hard one today. And you know, as somebody who has sat with one of the world's best, I think one of the world's best therapists, I'm going to somebody else who's helping me. I'm constantly trying to work on this. Why does this matter? It's because I was sitting in there today and I was talking to her about this. It's like, what's really hard for me is having to sit in a room with people and they're talking to me about an issue, and I'm like, fam, this ain't the issue. And like, I really want to say that. And she asked me that question today. She's like, so why don't you? She's like, why don't you say it? And I was like, well, then here's where I went, the codependent part. Well, you know, it's about, because if I do this, but what it came down to, at the base of it all, came down to, how am I going to be viewed? That was it. They're going to see me this way. Now, I justified, oh, no, because I want the message to get across, and it's not the right timing and all this stuff. But deep inside, it's how I'm going to be viewed, which goes back to why the beginning of this podcast, why you have to dig through your story, is because digging through my story, number one thing, I just want to be liked. I want to be understood. I don't want to be misunderstood, because a lot of my life I was misunderstood. So why we have to go back and know where we come from? Because that life messaging still speaks to you throughout your entire life. Even now, 45 years old, doing all this work, it's still trying to rear its head. And that thing is trying to hinder me from being fully who I need to be. And so that is why you have to dig through your story. That's why you have to see where you're coming from there, because that does impact. It'll impact you for the rest of your life.
Okay, so this is kind of a sharp turn.
Okay. Uh-oh.
But the most of this podcast so far, we focused on this is why this is important.
Yep.
And if you don't believe it is, and if you don't believe this is where you are, this is what you need to do.
Yep.
So let's take a shift to the person who has accepted the treacherous journey.
Yes.
And so let's talk about pain. Because that's what it is. It really is just pain.
Yep.
Can you share a little bit about your experience and also how you navigate the pain and the darkness that comes with having levels of self-awareness?
Yep.
And especially, I'm trying to find words to explain it, but that feeling that's like your head's just underwater and everything's going, it's like it feels any sudden movement, you're just going to be drugged down into the depths of it all. Because that's what it feels like all the time, and it ebbs and it flows. Can you explain a little bit about your experience and how you navigate that?
Yeah. It's because when you start, so on the beginning of it, you start becoming going back to the analogy I use about monsters in the closet. When you start to dig through and start to feel, remember you shut things down so you didn't feel pain. So just imagine you were taking your whole life, you had a nerve blocker because you had whatever, you have damaged nerves, whatever, and to block the pain. But all of a sudden they take you off the nerve blocker. You just slowly start coming off and you're like, what is going on? You were like, whoa, 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 whoa. I thought this was supposed to be better for me. Because they're telling you, yeah, we're going to take you off this nerve blocker. We can't stay on it. You're going to be better, though. But a lot of times, I was thankful I had somebody who told me it's going to get worse before it gets better. But a lot of times people don't say that. So what you end up doing is so I was prepared, but nothing can prepare you for it. I mean, I was prepared as best I could. It's going to get worse before it gets better. I'm like, all right, cool. And then you start going through it, and you're like, whoa.
And it gets worse, and you're like, am I doing something right?
Yeah, you're like, what am I doing wrong? You're like, is this supposed to be right? And what you start to feel, you start to, you become aware. First of all, internally, you start to realize of how much parts of your life have been shut down. So you go to, honestly, it's like a death in a sense. It's like you grieve and you don't realize, you're like, well, how am I grieving? Because you realize there's parts of you that time has gone by that you'll never get back. I used to think back man, what if I knew this? What if I would have met a Dr. Zoda when I was 16? Man, how early on with my marriage been, or my friendships been, or my faith would have been? What about that? And man, honestly, I was would grieve that. So, I would just be sad. I'm like, and then I would get angry about it. So I'm like, well, God, why didn't you bring somebody like that in my life before? And then, you kind of go through the process of grief. And so that's painful. You then start to realize, man, for me, again, I had a better childhood than most, especially for people who look like me. But then you start to realize, oh, it wasn't all as sweet as what it was. And then when you really start digging up the floorboards, you're like, oh, it really wasn't that sweet. I just convinced myself it was. That becomes, because now you start to realize, man, then you start to question all types. So it starts to feel lonely because you start to question everything. You start to think, things I thought about this, is that true? Is that not true? You start to question everything. Dude, you can go, if you're not careful, you can go down a world. You go, am I living in a simulation? Is this even real? Is this the Matrix? You start going down this whole world. The world's not real at all. And
we're laughing, but that's so real.
It's so true, because you just start realizing how much you drown out your life to survive, to fit in. That's what it is. You start to realize how much you're played. How I think you start to the loneliness becomes, because here's what the loneliness is. When you start pulling the mask off, you actually are getting acquainted with who you are, and that person's a stranger. That person's an actual stranger. And so it's lonely, because you know what? Even though you were this other and it wasn't fully who you were, and it was the mask, the performance, but you knew it. Now all of a sudden it's oh, I'm waking up to who is this person? Do I even like this person? Here's another one. will my spouse like this person? Because she got married to somebody else. She saw glimpses of the person, the real person, but then they're like, oh, shoot, this is the, is she going to really like me? Am I going to, like, what's going to lead to that? I mean, like, those are real, and it feels lonely. And then when you're someone who, because not everyone has a high, like, EQ, okay? Not every, there's people, I mean, I think we all grow in our EQ, but not everyone has, like, a high EQ or, again, and so when you really have that and the pain, you feel it even more, because then what you start to feel, when you start dealing with your own stuff, you start being around other people and you start feeling how deceived they are. Mm-hmm. And that begins to break your heart. And then you have to deal with being angry, like I was saying earlier, because you sit with people and you like listen to them talk to you and you literally just want to look at them. It's like, can we cut all the bullshit, please, and actually just have a real conversation now? Because what you're saying the issue is, or whatever you're saying, it's not the issue. It's not. It's because of this. And then when you actually start realizing that, you start speaking to that area, they think you're crazy because they definitely can't see it. And then you feel more lonely. And then it takes years, because many times what happens for me, it's the beauty of getting older. I had this conversation happen this past this week. Somebody coming to me and like sitting with me, and they were crying, and they looked at me and they're like, "Hey," they're like, "I just want to tell you I'm sorry." I was like, man, for what? You're like, you were telling me stuff years ago, and I would hear you, but I wasn't hearing you, and I wish I would have heard you because you were 100% right. And I can't tell you how many conversations I have like that, but in the moment, I feel crazy. I feel wrong. I feel like I did something wrong to them. I feel like, man, I said, man, maybe I've seen it wrong. Maybe I'm controlling. Maybe I'm deceived. Maybe I'm not self-aware. I tell people, I don't have to tell people I'm self-aware. If you're self-aware, then you're self-aware. So maybe I'm just not as self-aware as I think. And you start questioning, and it's just so lonely. And so it's just pain. It really is very, very lonely, very, very painful. And so, again, it's a gift and it's a curse. But I'll be honest with you, I wouldn't want to live. It's kind of like, it's like being unplugged from the Matrix. Like, I don't want to live any other way. Even as painful as it's been, I don't want to live any other way. I can't live the other way anymore.
If you could go back to your 30-ish-year-old self, mm-hmm. like first day, he's walking into the therapist's office and you're sitting with him, what piece of advice would you give to him and what encouragement would you give?
You're not crazy. You're not crazy. Matter of fact, you're a lot closer than you think. This is going to be very painful, but it's going to change your life. Don't question anything. Just go with it. Though I did that, there was always the questioning. I didn't know. I didn't know the end. I was hoping this was right, but I didn't know the end. But I would say, no. You're doing what's right. And in the end, that's kind of what I would say, that you're not crazy. Because I felt, most of my life, I felt that way. Most of my, adulthood, I felt that way. When I would speak to stuff. And again, when I would speak to stuff that people they couldn't see, and I could see it. And then it was always the hard thing that 5 years later, they would be saying the stuff I was saying and acting like it was new revelation. And I was like, what? I said that like a long time ago. And then you would feel what? Dismissed. No one understands me. No one sees me. That whole thing. And so, yeah, that would be the biggest thing I would say. You're not crazy. Well, hey, I hope today was helpful for you. What we try to do in these pods, we start off and, Bri does such a great job of the preparation and the questions and the things that we do. But one of the things that we always try to do is create room in here to be organic. We will wait, hey, we want to start on this topic, but the one thing we want to do is always let conversation grow. to be organic, to be natural, because we believe that's the best flow, the best fit. It feels the most authentic. And so I hope that what you heard today, as we were going through this pod, was really just the authentic nature of it. But also, I want to always be clear with this. We're not here to try to tell you, hey, this is step 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Our job is just to be, here are guideposts, here are signs. Why I like to tell a lot of, Bri tells her parts of her story. I tell my story is because all we want to do is we try to pull out guideposts and principles that can help guide you, because everybody's journey looks different. Everybody's journeys looks different. And what we hope we can do is like, oh, yeah, that's a sign. Not, oh, I've got to go do it like this, or, oh, up this way. No. But what we just care about is you just being the best authentic person that you have been designed to be. And because, listen, your marriage needs it. You listen, as a leader, like, it's needed. Those people who report to you, they need you to be authentic. Those kids who you have in your home need you to be that way. Your roommates need you to be that way. And so, your community needs you to be that way. The world's in desperate need of authentic leaders, because authentic leaders create credible cultures. And we're always creating culture, and we want you to create credible ones. So keep working, keep going, keep writing new rules.